the Minister for Regional Economic Development, the Honourable Shane Jones.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. E te kāhika, kei taku tuahine, kei a Stevie, tēnā koe. Me ngā kōrero i whārigitia i tēnei ata, hei whakatau, hei whakamārama ki ngā manuhiri i ngā painga o Rotorua. Tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings, folks. I have to imagine that I am among potential kindred spirits, because you are either not Fonterra or the Australian-owned banking industry. Although a number of you depend for your livelihood on keeping in the good books, I'm sure, with that financial sector. Stevie, as I said in our Māori language, I greet you. I note that our old boss, Helen Clark, was here yesterday, and I understand Colonel Woodard-Gardner, Sir Woodard-Gardner, spoke to the gathering. Both of those people, fine New Zealanders, and have made a major impact. Helen Clark made me the building minister, and Stevie, Mayor Chadwick, the dock minister. The first thing that I did when I was the building minister was to get out a knife and start cutting red tape, because that is my natural inclination. I had to wait until Helen Clark went overseas, however. She tended to have this encyclopedic approach, inversely related to my rather freewheeling style from Kaitaia. And then I was invited as the immigration minister. Just when you think, property people, that your days and your time is bleak, I can assure you, a bad day being the New Zealand immigration minister is worse than anything you'll ever face. However, I went at the invitation of Mr. Apple to Ngāti Kahungunu territory, Hawke's Bay. And it was in the early days that Helen Clark had asked if I would take some leadership in rolling out the regional seasonal employment scheme, where the New Zealand Labour government of that time was bringing in workers from Melanesia and throughout the Pacific to make up the gaps inside our horticultural industry. And we went to, I guess you'd call it a campground, and I saw rows upon rows of caravans up on chocks without any wheels. And I said to someone from Mr. Apple, what exactly is this all about? And he said, that is as a consequence of our local council not enabling us to build special purpose cabins to cope with these men and women coming from the Pacific. So we're allowed, perversely enough, to put them in caravans, and the blokes were all bigger than me, and we are able to circumvent the cobwebs of the Building Act by putting people in caravans and the caravans having no wheels. So from there I went back and I made a commitment that if I did anything with the Building Act, I was going to exempt the construction of 10 square metre sheds from the Building Act. Then if you wanted to build one and you're in property and you needed accommodation or whatever, just go and do it. Don't bother getting a permit. We shouldn't be blighting the system with these low level of risk activities. So that was my only legacy of any significance as the building minister to your industry. Had I have seen the future, I would have made them 25 square metre sheds, and we might have been well on our way to solving the housing crisis. Recently, I announced on behalf of the Cabinet the establishment of an infrastructure agency. I said to Prime Minister Jacinda when she asked me, and Winston asked me, would I be the infrastructure minister? And I said, if we're going to do nothing, please don't give the role to me. I'm 58 years old. I've come back into politics at the invitation to support my leader, Winston Peters. And if you want something that's just going to carry on how infrastructure has been dealt with over the last 9 years, bugger it. Give it to someone else. I'm not interested. So I said, no, we want genuine change. So the genuine change I'd like to see is, number one, we'll create an independent agency. I want to assemble some people very shortly, one or two, not too many, to actually stand the agency up. Divorce it from Treasury, get rid of what has been an ashtray on a motorbike, otherwise known as the Infrastructure Advisorial Board, chaired by a good friend of mine, John Ray, embedded somewhere in Treasury, and create an agency that is a portal and a point of contact for your industry, for international service providers, international investors, and a way for the Crown to better organise with local government how we're going to deliver efficiently and deliver in such a way that we leave a legacy amongst better trained people, not only better physical assets, with the 100 billion that we know we're on the hook for. I hope to create and establish this agency and have it funded prior to the next budget. The original proposal was to do it this time, October, November, December next year, which means it'll fall into the year of the election. Now, if you want to know more about that particular agency, I brought one of the new generation along with me. He's an advisor of mine. And Josh, if I could get you to stand up. I've checked with John if it's appropriate for me to do this. It's at the chairman's table. Please get in contact with him, because I want to run an open door policy with your industry. Because your industry, unless you start to engage with this government, whatever void you feel is there, we will fill it on your behalf with the bureaucracy from MB. And I have a love-hate relationship with a lot of the bureaucrats who advise me, largely because I've come with a large body of experience myself, not all fit for public consumption. But I would say to you, as an industry, we are changing the regulatory shape and form of the rights of property owners and the rights of tenants. This is an area that may contribute to the narrative. We're not sure about the nature of all the policy changes of the New Zealand First Jacinda-led, Green-supported government. Engage with us. Please, I cannot stress it more firmly than by saying, as your infrastructure minister, and infrastructure has a broad meaning, feel free to connect with me with all of your property issues, ranging from the quality, the timeliness, the cost of infrastructure, right through to the other challenges you might think that our policy agenda represents to you. Now, I know that having come from property at a personal level myself in the 90s, there's a freewheeling entrepreneurial spirit that gets property things going. Then it descends down to a managerial culture. And a lot of the managers, they are not entrepreneurial, but they are very focused on ensuring that the shareholder funds inside their organisations are adequately catered for. Well, this is a government that came, much to the surprise of many of you in this room, into being as the first genuine MMP government. Now, I go back to the days when I worked for 2 years as an advisor to David Lange, Roger Douglas, Geoffrey Palmer, Koro Wetere, 28 years old and 30 years old with 4 kids, packed myself up and went to study at Harvard University, then came back, worked for about 6 months with Jim Bolger, and then ended up in the Māori Fisheries Commission. And then ended up being invited by Helen Clark to join the fray with her, then got hoha with the Labour Party people and said, if you choose David Cunliffe, you're going to go into the electoral desert. I'm going to the tropics for 3 years. So when I say to you that it's a government that came as a surprise to everyone, but folks, it is the government that you and I am a part of, you have. So seek every opportunity to engage, and to the extent that a champion for infrastructure, for less red tape, for timeliness, for speed, and for recapturing the spirit that developed the country, treat my door as always open to yourselves. The element that is befuddling a number of us in the area of infrastructure is how we're going to pay for it. Our government is dead set on supporting Mr. Grant Robertson with his magical figure of getting, over the period of the government's time, to 20% debt in terms of core GDP figure. Now, there are debates, and God forbid they've come from the IMF as others, as we could expand that debt level, but the Prime Minister was very lucid at Westpac the other day and said, no, that will not be changing. So that then behoves us to look to the industry that you're partly, but not exclusively, a part of, sources and reservoirs of capital that we can draw in to meet the costs of the infrastructure. The envelope is very clear. We will not privatise the ownership of schools, of hospitals or prisons. And as obnoxious as some of that does sound to a number of business people, because they tell me they find it obnoxious and foolish and shallow, I'll see you in 2020. That was a campaign promise. In relation to everything else, Phil Twyford, no doubt to the extent that you're still listening to him, has talked about the need for innovative funding approaches, and that is something that will be embedded in the new infrastructure agency, so we attract people, perhaps of your ilk, who would never think of going to work in a government department or treasury, but would for a period of time work in a standalone agency that will have the best quality of knowledge and mix so that we can supercharge our projects forward through the government, because we are such big spenders on infrastructure. Third thing I'd say is that we are heavily reliant on migrant labour to build and to develop and to progress a lot of our projects. My boss, Winston Peters, is not a great enthusiast for unfettered or indiscriminate immigration. However, it's come to pass that as we now sink our teeth into these projects, and we did only get 7.5% of the vote, we're having to recalibrate a level of immigration that enables the economy to deliver the services for the stakeholders of the economy, you and I, our parents, our households, our communities, whilst at the same time taking on the unenviable task of bringing that segment of our young people back into the world of light and either preparing or making them work. And I see a great opportunity as we spend Crown money and local government money up to 100 billion over 10 years, and that figure will grow, I haven't got a sliver of doubt about that, that we also invest capital and money in creating the next generation of infrastructure leaders, infrastructure workers, infrastructure service providers. And I've found as a politician, Mr. President, John, that that's the hardest thing to do. I've actually found in my life that coming from the fishing industry and whatnot, there's always stress about assembling money, watching where money's going, getting value for money, but the most difficult thing as a politician I find is turning the lives of people around and requiring them to accept it's not good enough to have a view or an attitude, I don't want to change the way I'm living. I know it might represent a threat or a source of stress to the community I'm part of, but I don't want to change. Well, in my view to them is change you are, buddy. Either do it willingly or there's a corridor going to lead you to the Ngāwhā prison. And that's the very hard-line approach I take to ensuring that our infrastructure projects not only deliver for you, not only deliver for me as a politician, but it brings fellow New Zealanders and their families into the workforce. And to the extent that we can improve the procurement process of the state to affect those outcomes, I'll do it before lunchtime. The procurement process at this stage remains with David Parker and remains as a part of MB, but I think a more innovative approach to infrastructure will enable us to see if we can, well, I want to reset procurement anyway, so that we get a better balance, so that we ensure that firms remain viable, the industry flourishes, and the Crown can take a view that what we should be costing is the overarching life of an asset, not just the monetary value at one point in time when we effect a transaction. I can't be held responsible as the Infrastructure Minister for the ineptitude of Fletchers. And I have been criticised for promoting a reset conversation along with Phil Twyford and Minister Salesa But it's something we're going to advance anyway. But I would say the bonfire, the fiscal bonfire that we've seen at Fletcher's is incredibly disappointing to me as a Kiwi. Many of my relations and friends have worked there, but I can't be held responsible for that. But I would never want to see it repeated, and if there's a way that the Crown can be more sophisticated and work more effectively with the providers of the hard infrastructure that you manage or that you own, then that's one of the key challenges that I'm going to take up as an infrastructure minister. So, what have I just said? Get involved. Don't just carp. Don't just wait forlornly. Things will get better this time in 2 years in 2020 because we'll have a different mix of politicians. Don't take that punt. Get involved. If you feel as an industry or as a firm there's not a clear corridor for you to engage with us on the broad questions of the rights of property owners, the rights of rental dwellers, right through to what I've been talking to you about, the sort of synthetic world of funding infrastructure, please feel free to knock on my door, invite me to any particular event. Given that the number of people that I seem to have pissed off recently is growing, you may be the last door that's open to me. Thank you very much.